In this video, I will show you how to add Redux to a Create React app. First, we start by creating a new app. I will name the app as Redux Demo. Create React app takes a little bit of time to start a new app, so we'll wait while it finishes. Now we run the app using yarn start. It opens a new browser window at localhost 3000. So here we have our basic React app created using Create React app. Now let's add Redux to this. Let me open my code editor. If you browse the Create React app, all the source files are present in a src folder. And the main entry point is defined in index.js. And as you can see, index.js refers another component, app component. So let's make a few modifications to this app component. Let's get rid of some of this intro. We will remove the logo and we will get rid of the logo file. Let's see how it looks. Okay, I forgot to remove the reference here. Let me remove the reference to the logo file. Okay, this looks much better. Let me change the heading to Redux Demo. And let me change the height of the header to 50 pixels. So now we have a neat looking React app. Let's add a little bit of functionality to this React app. I'm going to define a counter and a button. When I click the button, I increment the counter. So let's do a small app using what we know in React, and then let's see how we can extend it to Redux. I'm just going to define a new counter in the state, and I'm going to display the counter, and right next to the counter I will have a button, and the button will have an on click. It will call a function in our class handle counter, let's say handle counter increase, and let me make the button just +1. Let's see how it looks like. So now we have a button. When you click on the button, the counter is incremented. So here is our little app, and it looks simple enough, right? So next we will try to move this counter and this counter increase to Redux and see how it works. First we add Redux to our app. We add Redux to the app by doing a yarn add Redux, and we'll also add React Redux. So Redux has something called a store. So let me just add a new folder called store. Let me have the store folder, and let me move all the other components into another folder called let's name this something like we will name it after a feature, and let's make the feature called dashboard. Sorry, this should be under source folder. So let me move all these components which you find here, the app components. We'll move all of them. We'll move all of them to dashboard. So dashboard is a new feature in our app. So I'm moving all the app related components into a feature folder called dashboard, and we have created another store folder. So the store folder will have everything related to Redux. But before we get on to Redux, let's check whether this folder reorganization works, and I think it works. So let's add a root reducer, or let's add our counter reducer first. As you know, a reducer is something which accepts it's a function that accepts a state and returns a new state. So I'm taking a state and let's have a default value of an empty object, and it takes an action as well, and it knows what to do with the action, and it returns a new state. So I'm doing a switch on the action, or action.type. So we'll have just one action which is called increment counter. So when this action is called, we just increment the counter and return it. And the default will be return state. Let me initialize the counter here. So this is our counter reducer. We have an increment counter which increments the counter state, and it initializes the counter state to 0 when the reducer is first called. Now let's define the root reducer. I'm importing the counter reducer which we just defined. Okay, I think I have to rename to a JavaScript file. And we will use combined reducers from Redux. So the root reducer is something which is going to combine all the reducers into a single reducer. So we're going to export that root reducer, and finally we're going to create a new store. We call create store from Redux. Sorry, we import create store from Redux, and we import the root reducer which we just created. To create a store, we use create store and then pass in the root reducer, and we just give an initial state to a store. So we have created a counter reducer, a root reducer, and a store. Now it's time to do the plumbing of the Redux store into our components. So what we have to do is we have to define a root component over here. So the root component which we are going to have is provided by the React Redux library. It's called provider. And what it needs is the store. So over here I just move this to a new line and add provider to the top of it. So I have made provider as a root component, the root component for our app, and it accepts the store. So this root component is the one which is going to supply all the props and does the plumbing between the Redux store and our React components. Okay, I've got a few errors here. I think this should be something like this. Yeah, I think it still works now. So let's define our action. Let's define an action in our dashboard folder. Before that, let's see our component and see how it looks. Now what we are going to do is we are going to use the counter from the Redux store than this state. So to connect to the Redux store, we have a connect higher order component from React Redux. The connect higher order component will take two parameters. These two parameters are nothing but functions we are going to define just now. So the first one takes the Redux store and passes some of the state as props to our component. So we have got here the store, or maybe I can call it state, the state of the store. And I'm going to define a counter prop, which is going to take the counter reducer, and within the counter reducer maybe the counter. So I can do a little bit of renaming here, but the renaming of this one, instead of counter.counter, let me have it as value. That will look more neat. So to make it value, I just need to go to the counter reducer. I need to call this as value and change it over to value and value. So this makes it a little bit neater. So if I go here, my counter prop is mapped to state.counter.value, and then we define actions, and these actions are also part of the props. So dispatch is something which is part of Redux. It dispatches action to the store. And now what we do is we define a action prop called onGetCounter, or on increment counter, and this on increment counter is just going to call dispatch and pass in an action. The action is nothing going to be of type increment counter. It's of action type increment counter. So where do we get this name? I think we have defined it in our reducer, increment counter. So we just have to match it here so that this reducer gets called. So how it works is we kind of call this on increment counter, which is defined in our props, and this on increment counter will actually dispatch the action which we are giving here to our store. The store in turn calls all the reducers, and this counter reducer is called, and the counter reducer is handling the increment counter action, and it will increment the value here as follows. So that's how it works, but we have an error here. Okay, dispatch type, I think it looks okay to me. Oh, I put functions. Okay, so we have map state to props, map dispatch to props, and we use connect to connect all of these props to our app component. So what we can do here is we can remove this function, we can remove the state, and we can remove the entire constructor. And what we can do is, instead of using this dot state dot counter, we will say this dot props dot counter, because these things are now as a part of props. And instead of handle increment, handle counter increase, we will just say this dot props dot on increment counter, right? And now let's see whether our app works. So we have got our Redux app, and it still continues to work. If I go and inspect the console, I don't see any errors. So I think our app works fine. Just to make sure it works, I'm going to refresh it a few times, and still it works. So we have successfully connected Redux to our React app, and hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you.